having the pleasure and the honor of introducing our speakers. And our first speaker is Katie Battaglino.
Good job.
Right? Yes, thank you. Creative writing major, who's going to be speaking to us about copy editing in the 21st century. Katie?
Yes. So, as he just said, my name is Katie Battaglino, and I'm a creative writing major with a double minor in dance and Spanish. And my honors capstone is on copy editing in the 21st century. So, before we get into the details of my project, I just wanted to take a quick second to define copy editing for those of you who don't know what it is. So, copy editing is the process of correcting a written work, focusing on making sure the grammar, punctuation, and mechanics are clean and without error. So, in doing this project, my initial research question was, how have copy editing tasks changed since the turn of the century? When I began, I thought that the copy editing positions were still prominent and present in the editing and publishing industry. However, as I delved further into my research, I found that it was less about how the tasks have changed and more about how copy editing as a profession has changed since the turn of the century. So this was surprising to me because this is a career path I'm interested in. So to get an insight on my research, this is what I discovered. Copy editing tasks haven't changed much over time. The copy editing profession has changed significantly with the advancements of technology and the accessibility of mass media. Artificial intelligence, or AI, is starting to challenge the abilities of a copy editor, but it is not yet a replacement for humans at this point. Because of the 24/7-hour news cycle, less and less people are viewing copy before it is published, and this leads to more errors, which in turn diminishes the credibility of the source. So, unfortunately, I found that copy editing positions and positions in the industry are declining through my research, but also through interviewing many different people from many different walks of life. It was fortunate for me because I was able to have such a diverse group of people and a range from young to old, as well as men and women from different parts of the country with different ethnic backgrounds. Though the commonality between everyone that I interviewed was that each person had been or is a copy editor now or at some point in their life. I had an in-person interview with Barbara Walraff, who was head copy editor at The Atlantic for 25 years, and I also interviewed several people over the phone and a couple from the New York Times, including Sandy Harvin and Meryl Perlman. The other part of my research included a case study, blogs that commented on the situation, and other articles with statistics about copy editing and where it is today. So here are some statistics on the topic. So the first graph is a result of a study done by Fred Volte, who is an associate professor at Wayne State University, and it shows how over 100 students reacted to 4 articles that were not copy edited, and then their reactions to the same articles after being copy edited. So as you can see by the graph, the students thought that the professionalism, organization, writing, and value of the articles were significantly heightened after being copy edited, yet the other graph that is displayed is showing the decline in newsroom employment from 2008 to 2017. This is an interesting juxtaposition because it is clear that copy editing makes a difference, yet their positions are continuing to get cut, especially at news companies. So I had some limitations and also drew some conclusions from my research. If I were to continue this project, I would want to gain a perspective from multiple positions in the field on the topic and the industry as a whole to see how they see the industry evolving. I could have also interviewed other non-professionals to gain aspiring writers' perspectives, just to hear from a point of view slightly removed from the industry itself. And the main conclusion I came to at the end of this project is that although technology is advancing and positions in the industry are declining, there is still a need for copy editors because errors are still getting published and artificial intelligence does not replace the work of a human editor. So you may be asking yourselves why this is so important outside of my specific discipline. And it is an important topic to discuss because if more and more errors are published in what we read, then it can diminish the credibility of the source. This is already a growing problem in news because of the 24-hour news cycle and that I previously mentioned. And if news sources are starting to lose credibility, they become less reliable. And then that could progress and extend to magazines, books, and other academic written works. So if we stop caring if what is being published is being written correctly, it may eventually set a new and low standard for communication, which affects people on a global scale. So, as I mentioned in the beginning, this was a topic that I was particularly passionate about because of how my interests have developed over the course of my college career. I came in undeclared as a freshman and always had a passion for writing, though, since I was young. At the beginning of my sophomore year, I took the creative writing class, literary publishing, and then that started to drive my passion towards editing. After taking literary publishing for a fifth time now and taking on the role of co-managing editor, I still really enjoy fine-tuning, polishing, and analyzing written text for clarity. So as I was progressing through college, I also realized how important it is to help our community and our society progress. Through my honors experience, I have done hands-on community service, which has been really rewarding, and I feel a similar feeling when I help a writer realize their full potential in writing. So, as my college career is quickly coming to an end, I now know that my main goal and purpose is to help writers find their fullest potential through their work, and therefore my contribution to society is to ensure that communication is not lost, and on a more focused level, I really want to help writers do the best work that they can. And throughout my years at Roger Williams University, I've developed a heightened awareness for editing, grammar, and punctuation. And though beyond that, I enjoy finding meaning in writing and making it flow in a way that's most effective. So in the future, I hope to pursue a career in editing and copy editing specifically if there are jobs available. And I'm currently an intern for Spinner Publications in New Bedford, and I'm editing a historical fiction book, and I really enjoy that. So that's a little bit about the background of why I did this project. So going forward, it's important to recognize that this is a simple yet multifaceted topic that affects all disciplines. The results of copy-edited work can change the outcome of the source's reputation and credibility. And lastly, if everyone can prioritize the importance of writing properly, we will continue to advance as an educated society. And most importantly, your takeaway should be that everyone will always need a copy editor. So, thank you, and these are my works.
Thank you, Kate. She is a biology and Spanish double major. Got that right?
Yes.
Yep. And the title of her presentation is Why Spain Still Smokes Cigarettes in the Age of the Vape. So we get some interesting intercultural information here. Thank you, Alana. Take it away.
Thank you, Dr. Campbell. So my name's Alana Briley, but you know that now. I just want to say thank you for coming and sweating in this very hot room, so I hope it's not too uncomfortable while I yell at you about smoking. So I'm a Spanish and double major, and I have a minor in chemistry. And so my capstone is titled Why Spain Still Smokes in the Age of Cigarettes. And essentially it's just a comprehensive review on smoking cessation in Spain, Northern Europe, and America, so I hope you followed that. I also was able to complete this with Dr. Peter Thompson, who is the chair of the Modern Languages Department. So the idea for my thesis really started when I was abroad in Spain last spring. When I was there, it just seemed everyone was smoking everywhere, in our faces, all the time. So when we walked to school, we saw young kids in school uniforms smoking before class. We saw older men, younger women with babies in their strollers, waiters and bartenders outside on their break, and even our host brother was a smoker. Also, while we were sitting outside doing homework at cafes, we were always asked, do you have a lighter? Do you have a cigarette? So with the opportunity to complete my Spanish thesis, I decided to investigate why everyone was still smoking. But really more importantly, why was I so offended by this? Where in my American upbringing did I learn that smoking was bad for you that these Spaniards just don't understand yet. So my research question ended up just being simply, why does Spain still smoke? To answer this question, I used cohort studies, newspaper articles about statistics of why people smoke based on their age, their gender, and their just preferred nicotine device in general. I also used historical timelines about how tobacco first traveled to Europe because it is a Native American plant. And I also used journal articles about the negative health effects of smoking. So these first two articles that are up here were really just the first steps. They had the evidence that I needed to be able to find more information about why Spain still smokes. And then from there, I was able to find more sources and answer my question. And my Spanish language skills obviously came in handy, so going to Spain wasn't a waste. I had to read studies that were in Spanish and English, and a lot of the language, in both languages, I didn't really understand, so part of it was still a learning opportunity to learn more about the medical profession in general. So as for my results, I found that the historical timeline of all these countries that still smoke really just had the answers. I really was just uncovering a story that I didn't have all the answers to yet. So Spain has really been one step behind America in this smoking culture since their first use and invention of cigarettes. So for example, going all the way back to the 1880s, the cigarette rolling machine was first invented in the United States, but Spain didn't import this machine until 50 years later in the 1930s. Then Spain was frozen in time almost in this almost 40-year dictatorship by Francisco Franco. So they maintained this traditionalist culture where men could smoke but women couldn't. While in the United States, women and men were both making advantages to smoking and equality. Also, while the US hit a peak epidemic in the 1960s, Spain was just starting to pick up the habit and really get into smoking, so they didn't peak until later on, 20 years later. In 2010, Spain then enacted a smoking ban that said no smoking in any public places, indoor and outdoor, but the US had already had these smoking bans in place for over a decade. Oops, sorry, one more. Also, just reflecting on my time in Spain, I realized that I actually saw a lot of this. I saw that people were actually just smoking outside, but when you walk out of the shop, there's smoke everywhere in your face, so it just seems like you're surrounded by it. And I also saw that there were many packages of cigarettes that said, "Warning, smoking is bad for you," and there were these really graphic pictures of lungs and hearts that were affected by smoking, but it just didn't seem like people really respected that yet. So as for my conclusions, there were a lot of answers to what seemed like a very simple question. So ultimately I found that Spain smokes because they're still years behind the US in creating this stigma about what's bad about smoking. And this is partly because, well, they had a native plant to America that they then had to import, all the machinery, so their technology was still lagging behind at this point. But also they didn't have the opportunity to catch up to the US because of that dictatorship that lasted for almost 40 years. So now they're still in this liberalization phase against Franco, and so the society is still pretty dismissive about the scientific evidence towards smoking and these negative health effects. So really I found that this is the first paper that I've written that shows anything about why Spaniards smoke or why anyone else in the world smokes. There's no real cumulative evidence that says why. So it's important because it still contributes to this current discussion on smoking cessation in general, but it can also serve for background information for any future health studies to enforce smoking cessation for adults, as well as it helps health workers and law enforcers in general, because this is a way that we can figure out why are people still smoking and how we can help that, how we can stop that, how we can make them healthier. So as for limitations, I had a lot because, first of all, I'm making this new thing that I've never seen before. Also, I didn't know I was going to be writing this thesis when I was in Spain, so maybe had I known, I could have interviewed people that smoked, because we met a lot of people that did, even our friends that were there. So I could have had more primary sources if that was the case. But with the resources that I had, I was still limited because a lot of these journal articles were authored by the same people, so there was some bias there in itself, but also these authors were involved in smoking cessation campaigns. So you can kind of see why it's hard to really sift out what's actually important in these sources. And I didn't really have enough time to analyze all the evidence, because when I did a quick little Google search of top countries that smoke the most, there are a lot of Eastern European countries, which I wasn't there, I was in Spain. So these countries, for example, are Bosnia, Serbia, Montenegro, Ukraine. So maybe there's a correlation between the distance and time. So these countries are a lot further east than Spain in relation to America. So what if there's a change in how far away they are to America and how much time it takes to create this stigma that we've already created? But again, I don't really know. And I was limited to only English and Spanish sources, so these are the languages that I can understand, but there are languages out there that probably have more information about smoking cessation, so Serbian, Montenegro, Croatian, all these languages that are spoken in these Eastern European countries. What was really interesting though, as far as the limitation, is that the more I looked, really the less I found. There weren't really clear origins about when people started smoking, where they started smoking, what ingredients were in these cigarettes. I just found that they put a filter on because it was like spooky and we don't know what's going on, but we still don't really know what's in them. And so it's possible that we'll never know this information because there's so much confidential information about smoking policies and agreements between countries and between states. So through creating my thesis, I finally understood what the importance of being a citizen scholar is, because we do talk about that a lot in honors, and I finally understood what it meant, and how this scholarship can be a form of active citizenship. So to start, the idea for my thesis obviously came from being immersed in a culture that was different to my own. So there's some diversity there already. Spain's customs, traditions, and of course, the smoking culture was different to what I was used to here in America. But through research, I also found deeper levels of diversity. So first, there was geographic diversity. The region of Spain with the highest amount of smokers was Andalusia, in which I was living. So you can see that right here in the circled region. Also, there was demographic diversity. So there are more male adult smokers in Spain, but there are more young female smokers. So we can see maybe there's a difference in marketing as well for tobacco companies. This was also a trend that I found we had in the United States during the peak years in the 1960s. So there is a sense that Spain somehow is following our trend, but just a little bit further along than we are. There are also just many diverse disciplines that are affected by smoking culture. So when I was researching, I found that there are a lot of different types of studies. There were the cohort studies about how many people smoked and when they were born, but also just historical timelines and health effect studies over the years. So all of these professionals play a role in how we perceive smoking itself. Obviously, the diversity doesn't stop there, so I've had many diverse experiences over the last 4 years in honors that helped me become a successful citizen scholar. As a pre-medicine student, I'm working towards my professional identity as a medical professional. So just to name a few, my thesis obviously has helped me figure out the role of these medical professionals. They've maintained composure, definitely, while working with patients who have had these diseases that are caused by their own choices. It's also important to realize for me that there are a lot of different types of people out there, so we need to make sure we take advantage of all the patients that we have and how we can solve their problems. As far as the honors program, I've been able to work with fellow students who don't study the same major as my own. So I've learned to explain the biological inner workings of our bodies to people that don't intimately study it, but I've also been able to ask meaningful questions about other majors. So I was able to use these types of questions to answer the lingering questions I had after study abroad. Also, for my community engagement class, I had the opportunity to participate in an alternative spring break trip called Stay Break, where we learned about food insecurity in Bristol. And we found that Bristol actually is a food desert, so there's not enough healthy food available within the square mile criterion, whatever that is. So there are some people that are battling obesity and other health-related problems, but they're living in the society that in this society that they just can't really help it, so they have these unhealthy lifestyles that there's no really way to change it for them. So now I've realized that perhaps in Spain, they're just born into the society that they don't really know any different. So they're making these unhealthy choices that we see are bad, but they might not see it's bad. So obviously being a citizen scholar is being able to integrate and connect your knowledge to other aspects of the public sphere. So the obvious one, besides language, is personal and public health. So smoking affects our personal health, but it also affects other people's health. For the people that don't choose to smoke, they're still exposed to cigarette smoke, even if they don't choose it. Also, there's economics. So buying tobacco lowers a person's income, so if they need to, they can't really rise out of poverty. But also, Spain has spent over $20 billion in health expenditures of the loss of productivity due to smoking-related morbidity or mortality. So this is potential money that they could then put back into their government if they didn't have so much productivity loss. And lastly, just environmental conservation. So cigarettes are made out of synthetic material. So if you want to save the environment, like we've all been talking about, just don't smoke, don't put your litter on the ground. This also includes vapes and Juul pods. So lastly, I'm yelling at you about smoking in Spain, so why should you care? You're not in Spain. Well, there are some ways that we can make a difference. So we could think about smoking in developing countries, increasing the number of smokers. We could think about American tobacco companies being a bad influence on these developing countries. We could think about all the information that we just will never know about the secrecy of drug use in America. But let's think about vaping. So in 2018, the US Surgeon General declared that we are in the midst of a vaping epidemic among not only young people, which is what we see, but also in older people. So we really don't know all the details yet about vaping, but we know that there are some harmful chemicals. So don't let the fruity vapor fool you, and definitely don't give in to peer pressure. Just don't do it. I really urge you to educate yourselves, your family, and your friends on the harm of what you could be doing while smoking or vaping. Maybe soon, some of us will be working for big corporations that have campaigns and product lines that we don't really believe in. So I challenge you to stand up for what you believe is right, and I also challenge you to support organizations that are fighting for a better and healthier future. We've all benefited from $250,000 in education. How will we use it? Thank you.
Thank you, Alana. And next we'll be hearing from Sarah, a psychology major. No, not a psychology major, sorry.
Political science and economics.
Political science and economics. Oh, sorry, there it is. Yep, sorry, I was skipping ahead to session number 6, I apologize. +9 economics major, and her presentation is, I just don't like her, in quotes, right? Gender and likability in political candidates. Very exciting stuff. Thank you, Sarah.
Hi everyone, so as Dr. Campbell already said, my name is Sarah Wood and I'm a double major in political science and economics with a minor in global communication. And my honors capstone is I just don't like her, gender and likability in political candidates. It was also used as my political science senior thesis, and it was done in conjunction with Dr. June Speakman from the Department of Political Science. So my capstone sought to answer the question of, is there a correlation between gender and likability in political candidates? When deciding on a topic for my honors capstone, because it was also my political science senior thesis, I thought back to all the classes that I'd taken in political science over my 4 years here at Roger Williams. And the class that I found most interesting and was really compelling and I was passionate about was my gender and politics class, which I took the spring of my sophomore year. So it was the spring of 2017 and directly after the fall 2016 presidential race between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. Because of the timing of this class and obviously the title, we spent a lot of time analyzing why Hillary Clinton lost the presidential race, and one of her critiques was that she just wasn't likable. When you would speak to voters about her, they would say, I just don't like her, I just don't trust her, and that's really why I just chose not to vote for her. I just don't like her. So we sought to answer the question, is that related at all to her gender or is it not? Another interesting part of that class that really influenced me was the Howard and Heidi study. The Howard and Heidi study was done at the Columbia School of Business, where a professor gave his class a case study of Heidi, a successful Silicon Valley venture capitalist woman. And he split his class in half, and half the class received the case study as is, and the other half of the class received the exact same case study, except he replaced Heidi's name with Howard. When reconvening, both halves of the class rated both Heidi and Howard as equally competent, except they said that they found Howard more likable than Heidi. They were also more willing to hire Howard than Heidi, and lastly, they found Heidi more selfish than they found Howard, even though it was the exact same case study, just with the names changed. So based on that, I really wanted to expand on that specific study, but instead of relating it to women in leadership roles in business, I wanted to expand it to women in political roles. So my study. So I sought to prove or disprove the hypothesis of female presidential candidates are less likely to be liked and voted for by the U.S. voters than their male counterparts, so male presidential candidates, holding all else constant. So I chose these two individuals, which as you can see are of roughly the same age, the same ethnicity, same race, have roughly the same public speaking skills, and basically their only major difference is their gender. I then crafted a bipartisan 2-minute speech of them announcing their intent to run for the President of the United States. The speech contained their political and personal background, as well as their political platform, which I tried to draw on just core American values in order to make this speech as bipartisan as possible. For their political and personal background, I took a mix of Joe Biden and John Kerry's personal political background in order to ensure that they had the necessary credentials that they would be voted into office or worthy of being voted into office by the students taking the survey. So my survey. I surveyed 746 Roger Williams University students in 46 different classrooms at Roger Williams University. So 23 students only viewed the male-female giving his presidential speech and then took the survey, and the other 23 classes only viewed the female speech giving her the exact same speech and then took the exact same survey. No student saw both speeches. If there was ever a duplicate student in duplicate classes, I just asked that they do not take the survey again. So the survey, as you can see, the top half is just basic demographics of the student. The bottom half tries to assess the student's likability of the political candidate, and then also if the student would vote for the political candidate. The likability scale and factors are taken from the Stephen Rayson likability scale, which is designed to understand the respondent's likability of the subject at hand. It's evaluated on a 5-point scale ranging from strongly disagree to strongly agree with neutral in the middle. And then after the 5 questions of likability, which range from is the candidate friendly, approachable, warm, it brings it back to political science asking, do you think the candidate's qualified for office and would you consider voting for this candidate? So what were my results? So my results were in the variables of friendly, warm, approachable, knowledgeable, and qualified for office, the students rated the male and female candidates as no difference. So there was no statistically significant difference between those variables and between the 2 videos that the students watched of the candidates. However, for the variables of likable, would you be friends with this candidate? Do you find this candidate similar to yourself? And would you consider voting for this candidate? There was statistically significant difference in all 4 of those variables between the students that viewed the male video and the students that viewed the female video, all in favor of the male. So in each of these 4 categories, the students viewed the male as being more likable, would rather be friends with, so on. So what are the takeaways? So the students rated the male and female candidate as both equally qualified and equally knowledgeable, which makes sense because they were, again, giving the same speech. However, they said that they were still more likely to vote for the male candidate than the female. And why is this? Again, it goes back to the likability variable where they did find the male more likable. They'd rather see themselves being friends with the male. They could relate more to the male in similarity. So again, those were the overall results from my study. So what? So as our previous honors director would always say, Dr. Spritz, so what? So you did all this work, but where are the implications for the outside world in all this work that you did? So the first is I should adjust my limitations. My largest limitation in this study was the time, because I was constrained with only 1 semester to craft and carry out all of the research for this study. there was a couple pitfalls. So for example, my mock presidential candidates, I was at first worried because the male presidential candidate tripped over his words a couple times, whereas the female spoke more eloquently. So I was scared that that might hinder my results. It at least did not, as far as I can see. Also the analyzation of my results. So as of right now, I haven't been able yet to analyze if there's any difference in how the female students analyze the candidate differently than the male students, or if their political ideology or standing or major had any effect. In the future, I will do that, but again, because I was constrained with time and only one semester to carry out this project, I have not been able to delve that deep into the results as of now. So then, I already spoke about how my political science professional self influenced this project and how I chose this project, but how did honors and my self in honors also influence this project? So throughout our honors core curriculum classes, we are always asked, who am I? What do I know? And then based on what I know and who I am, how should I act? So the first question of who am I was always in the back of my mind during this project. So first and foremost, I am a Roger Williams University student, and because of that, I was very interested in how my peers and classmates viewed these candidates and if there would be a difference between the gender of these candidates or not. Secondly, I'm the president of the International Relations Club on campus, and I'm also the Student Life Chair on Student Senate, which are both leadership roles within politics at the collegiate level. So again, I'm a female in politics, so I personally was very invested and interested in this project and the results of it. Also, I'm a statistics tutor, so personally I just find statistics very interesting, so I was very happy to be able to create a project where I could create my own data and create my own statistics and analyze them accordingly. And then lastly, specifically for honors, for my community engagement project, I was part of the Developing Minds LLC, where we went to the Colt Andrews School, which is the Bristol Elementary School, and we mentored young girls. And then because of that, again, it's just bringing awareness to a problem that has been debated and trying to help females get into leadership positions globally. So then diversity of thought and experience. So again, because this was conducted on the Roger Williams University campus, I was constrained by the diversity within Roger Williams. However, I was able to get diversity of thought. I was able to survey classes in all of the undergraduate schools across campus. So not only did I only survey political science or psychology students, but I was also able to go into engineering classes, architecture classes, biology classes, and so on. And thus I was able to bring a mix of perspectives into the survey and have them all be represented accurately. Next, correlation. So again, because I was able to ask for the basic demographics of the students, I can be able to see how they influence the students evaluating the candidate. So did females or males rate the candidates differently? Did major have an impact? And then be able to understand how the diversity of coming from different states or having a different major or your class standing would impact your response to these different mock presidential candidates. Lastly, extrapolation. This one is twofold. First, I can extrapolate my survey results to all other 18 to 22-year-olds within the U.S. who would be voting for presidential candidates. But more importantly, I can also extrapolate my results to other minorities within politics, but also in leadership positions. So while I only focused on the variable of gender, you could also focus on the variable of a presidential candidate's religion, their race, their sexual orientation, and so on, and how that might affect likability and voting for themselves. So then on to the real world. So again, for future studies, I could expand my sample and my population to be more representative of the U.S. or also the world at large. And then social responsibility. So women are half of our population here. And again, this doesn't end with politics. This can be shown in all areas of life, such as leadership positions in all aspects for women. And then also, it doesn't end within the U.S. This is an issue globally and can be shown for women in leadership positions all over the world, not just nationally. And then also local communities. So again, whether you're running for town office in Bristol or for the President of the United States, there is an issue with gender and likability being gender likability and success being negatively correlated for women and positively correlated for men, which can affect all aspects. And then your turn. So most of you are all registered voters within the U.S. So when you go into the voting booths, either for your local town office or for the upcoming presidential election, be mindful of gender. Don't take it out of the equation, but keep it in the back of your mind to understand that it is a variable. And next off, gender biases, they appear every day in our life. So again, it doesn't end with politics, but it really can be applied to all aspects of your life. And then lastly, I just don't like her. Next time you find yourself thinking that, ask yourself why. Is it because she demonstrates the characteristics that are not normally associated with females, such as being successful or strong leadership roles, and are more normally associated with males? Or is it something else? And then special thanks to all of the students who participated in my survey and all the professors who allowed me into their classroom, as well as Dr. Palm and Dr. Speakman for helping me create my honors capstone and political science thesis. And then thank you so much for coming to my honors capstone at Sash, and then I'll be available for any questions during the question and answer period at the end.
Alana and Katie, do you mind coming back up to begin the Q&A session? We have about 15 minutes, which is great. We'll wrap up things at around 10 of, or maybe a little bit after. So, any pressing questions from the audience? You can address any one of the speakers. Yeah, Michelle?
Alana, so about the smoking in Spain, are you gonna do anything with that, like in the future in your your professional career? Are you gonna go back to Spain and try to convince them to stop or something like that?
As far as Spain, I don't think I have really the resources to be able to ask people to stop. My friends and I, and Sarah's in the audience, we said, just have a copy of your thesis and hand it out and be like, stop smoking, it's bad for you, here's the evidence. So I thought of that, but I think it's more my civic duty to put that into my professional role. So in the future, I hope to be some sort of medical professional, if it's a doctor or something else. So I think my main role with that is to explain what the negative health effects if someone does choose to smoke, or to be able to help peers or other people just to come out of these situations. Or the other side of it would just ask myself why. I think the most important thing is to, as Sarah was saying, really just ask yourself why you're kind of feeling these things, and how can I help people based on what I know and what are my resources.
Well, I have one. I have several actually for each of you. But Katie, thank you for bringing us a really kind of up-to-date picture of copy editing and the kind of structural challenges to it, right? I guess I had never, I'm a consumer of news and a consumer of media, but I guess I never stopped to think about the challenges of AI, right? Grammarly,
Yeah.
right? Everyone knows about Grammarly, right? The app that can help you be a better writer, taking a job away from a copy editor, right? And then, of course, the 24/7 news cycle and this kind of explosion of content, which is being generated at kind of receding standards of grammar and all the rest of it.
Yes.
So that was really great. But I wonder if on that side, on the challenge of the 24/7 news cycle, there's also maybe an opportunity to think through copy editing as profession, as avocation, but also as part of the editorial process, which is bigger than just grammar and punctuation, but it's about content selection, content, and putting content in a kind of a curated way in front of users, as opposed to this kind of, quote-unquote democratic embrace of anybody can be an author, anyone can produce content.
Right.
So I wonder if you could speak to that, right? Especially in the era of fake news, right? What is the moral and ethical and sort of political responsibility of the editor?
Yeah, so if I had had more time, I would have broadened my thesis to the content of the news cycle and what's being put out there and all. Actually, another person in my class who's part of the literary publishing thesis did it mainly on content, and we're seeing a resurgence in political nonfiction books skyrocketing, and just because of the Trump administration, everyone finds it really interesting. So therefore, fiction is kind of taking a hit now because it's not as interesting, it's not as up to date, and yeah, there are always things being published with errors, and that's just something that we're kind of coming into. It's really kind of new because we don't really know how to deal with it, and our, like I said, copy editing positions are declining, so
Right.
we're not handling it well right now.
Right, but I wonder, I guess maybe I can ask the question more precisely. So there's the kind of errors, the copy editing errors that, you know, maybe AI can kind of spot some of them, not quite perfectly, but then there are errors of fact, right?
Yeah.
There's fake, like irresponsible news, right? And it's up to an editor, not necessarily a copy editor, to have the discretion to not do that, right? So,
Yeah.
so where is there maybe, as the deck chairs of publishing get reconfigured, and maybe there aren't as many copy editing jobs because a robot can do the comma
The
splice,
basics,
right?
yeah.
But the errors in fact, the errors in judgment, the ethical responsibility of journalism, is there a new way to rethink editorship so that someone with your love of language also is doing that kind of work?
Yeah, I think so. I feel that it's really important for an editor to make sure that the content that they're putting out is right or morally sound. It's really difficult to see the journalism side of it and see those corrupt editorial decisions happening.
Yeah.
So it's definitely something that I would like to look more into, but I do think it's a huge responsibility of the editor to also make sure that their facts are correct, and that comes with checking your resources, making sure that everything is correct and vetted.
Mhm. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Questions? Yeah, please.
Katie, thank you. I read 2 papers a day, one a small town paper in New Hampshire, the other one a major city paper in Portland, and I'm always picking up on the copy
Yeah.
errors, and I never really knew why. A good friend of mine happened to be married to the editor, and I used to ask, why are there all these errors? And to me, I don't feel like I'm getting my money's worth out of reading the paper,
Yep.
and now you've made it clear.
Yeah, and it really diminishes the credibility,
It does.
as I was saying before. When I read articles and I see typos or grammatical mistakes, I immediately double check the source, because if they're not taking a keen eye to it, then who knows what else they're missing.
No, thank you for explaining it. And Alana, I spent a month in Spain under Franco's regime in 1970. And the only thing I remember, I was a freshman in high school, and the thing I remember is there were a lot of people, more people smoking in the United States than when I went to Europe.
Yeah.
But
And now it's the opposite.
yeah, it was the opposite. And I just remember a big military presence
Mm-hmm.
in mostly Madrid, and we spent a month in Valencia. And you just didn't feel you had the freedom that you had in the United States. You know, the people felt a little repressed, but thank you for explaining that. I never really put 2 and 2
Yeah.
together. Thank you.
Sarah, I think your study is so cool. But because I know you and I know what your plans are for after graduation, how can you use your study in your professional life as you help the people that you'll be working with?
So, because my plans after graduation are so different from my study, I guess just
What are your plans after graduation, Sarah?
I'm going to be with marketing,
Mm-hmm.
sales.
Mm-hmm.
Just be mindful of it. Yeah.
Well, I think that connects maybe to a question I could ask you too, Sarah, about the specific kind of trend that you're pointing to, right? I mean, or the differences in perception, right? Speaks to the political culture that we have. We think of politics as being, about a sort of contest over ideas, or perhaps a contest over people, but it also reflects a kind of broader set of values that maybe an electorate holds, right? And so it wasn't surprising at all that, regardless of what they saw, that the students, and regardless of their gender and their discipline, and it was very good of you to cast your net widely, right? That folks said, okay, yeah, they're both qualified, right? But I don't like her as much, right? There's that likability issue, right? I wonder if 50 years ago you had done the same, study,
Right.
If you would have gotten the kind of, equal marks on qualification, probably not, right? Because think of how different even the college environment is 50 years ago. You didn't have, coeducational institutions to the extent that you have now. So, but my question to you is, okay, so you found this, which seems right. It seems to confirm something about our political culture. Did you look at other political cultures, right? Because you look at Europe and you've seen, in Britain, in Germany, in many countries in Western Europe, female leaders, prime ministers, presidents, et cetera, and also leaders of government, also, more kind of represented in business, et cetera. So the political cultures there seem to be different, but maybe they're not. So I'm wondering if there's levels, if there's studies done at kind of the level that you did that serve for a comparison.
Yeah, so there were certain studies that I looked at, like specifically in like Germany and Sweden, where the political candidates as females were successful because they chose to run a different political campaign. So instead of like trying to have the same attributes that you would expect out of a male presidential candidate or any political candidate, they chose to do, for example, one woman in Sweden did girl power, and how she only chose to run a positive campaign, so they did not run any attack ads, and she tried to come off from the more like softer feminine and just play that card instead of trying to play like a strong leader card, if that makes sense. So did look at those different comparisons, but again, whenever it appeared that the female candidates were using, I would say, harsher tactics, one that you might typically see from a male political candidate, it did not, the results were not favorable, and they often did not get elected into their
Which seems to
office.
confirm what your data shows, which
Yes.
is that there are two different standards.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah. Interesting.
I actually had questions for all three of you because your products were all really cool. Sarah, so I was just wondering if you've ever personally felt like the gender bias, because you said that you're like involved in like political leadership roles on campus. Like, have you ever like felt like that?
Personally, I have never felt the gender bias, which is why I was specifically very interested in the Roger Williams University students, because through specifically International Relations Organization, we would go and compete at many different conferences, both nationally and internationally, and you're working with many people who you assume will be leaders, because it's Model United Nations conferences that you're going to, so you expect them to, most of them go into the political field and be political leaders in the future. And I was always treated with respect from my other delegates, and I never did feel that I was treated any differently being a female, which is why I was specifically very interested to see what my peers and classmates at Roger Williams University, how they took this study, because as many other studies have been done, it hasn't been in favor of females, but I wasn't sure that because we are from a different generation and have different views, again, it wasn't done 50 years ago, it was done today on a college campus, a liberal arts college campus especially, so that's why I was specifically interested, because personally in all of my roles I have never felt a bias, so.
Cool, thanks. And Alana, so you were saying how like smoking in the Spanish culture is kind of like behind the U.S. culture. Like we implemented like bans like before they did. So then why, like, did you see any research on why like vaping is so prominent now then? Like,
I've actually asked myself that, because it's really hard to say that Spain is on the exact same track that America is, because they're not, because their history and their political history and their laws are a lot different, and even just their culture in itself and their personality of people that I've met in Spain is a lot different to America. So I can't say why it's really popular, but I can say that there is a lot of marketing towards young people, and tobacco companies are changing, and we now know how essentially horrible that cigarettes can be in regards to your health, and there aren't a lot of studies on how vaping can be bad in these liquid cartridges that they have. So I think as far as young people in general, they may not understand the full picture of it all, because they're like, wow, vaping's really cool, everyone does it, it tastes really good. So I think it's, as far as marketing, I think that's the biggest thing that there is right now, but I don't have all the answers, obviously, because I haven't been able to research it, but that's my idea, yeah.
Yeah, no, that makes sense, thanks.
Yeah.
And sorry everyone, but then Katie, then I was just wondering about the 24-hour news cycle, like what Dr. Campbell was mentioning. So like the epidemic of not being able to like copy edit before news is released. Was there any research, like, or do you find anything of like a solution to that? Like maybe hiring more copy editors, like passing a law that like it has to be copy edited or something? Like,
So basically, yeah, that's a great question. So basically, like, what they end up doing, or like a quick solution to the issue, is that because everything is online, or most everything is online, they will run corrections in the next week or the next day, depending on the severity of the error. So like, let's say like it was like Trump says blah blah blah, and they spelled his name like Trump or something, like they would make that a correction. And yes, you would think that they would want to hire more copy editors, but I think they're more concerned with getting the news out there and the money.
makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually, well, good job to all of you guys, but I did specifically had a question for Katie, because I'm also a creative writing major. I was just wondering how your internship is going, or has been going.
Yeah, it's going really well. So I work at Spinner Publications, as I mentioned, and we're producing a historical fiction book right now, and basically what I'm doing right now is editing and proofreading. So I'll like get in on Wednesday and I just copy edit all day, and 60 pages a day, and then sometimes I'll go through it with my boss, and we'll go through and he'll be like, oh, like this is where you miss whatever, and then other times he's like, wow, these are really great catches. So it's actually a really great learning experience just to see, even though it's a small publishing company, just to see what's out there.
Awesome.
Yeah, actually, sorry. So Sarah, you said you didn't really get a chance to look at like the gender sort of with the people that you were taking the study on, like how that affected. But do you think there's any influence with age, like generationally? I like to think that the younger generations are more accepting. So do you think, based on your research, there's any influence, like age-wise, on like the likability of candidates?
Yeah, so just to clarify, do you mean like age-wise between like the like seniors I would have had taken the study and like the first years?
Yeah.
Yeah, so personally going into it, I did not include that as one of my controls. I was most worried about there being a difference in how different majors would evaluate the political candidates, which is why I tried to control as much as I could for the different majors. I did find that in my very preliminary analyzation of the results, there was no difference between the first year students that I had take the survey and the fourth year. However, it wasn't divided up equally. Thankfully, my sample size was so large that there was still enough representation from each class for it to be considered reliable. But from my like preliminary analyzation, I did not find any discrepancy between how the first year students rated the candidates and the fourth year students, except for the fact that the first year students were just kind of both nice, like more generous, I suppose, in their answers to both of the candidates than the fourth year students. I would just say the fourth year students were more critical being seniors, but I didn't find any difference in gender between the two different grades or the second year or third year students as well.
Well, unfortunately, we are out of time, so please do give our presenters one more round of applause. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Lana. Thank you, Katie. Great work. Congratulations. And we will be having one more session now at 3 o'clock. Or sorry, at 4 o'clock. 4 o'clock. That is wrong. Till 5 o'clock. So stick around for one more session, or go to 220 right down the hall to catch some more great capstone presentations. Thank you.
Thank you.